do you think that's where the defense is going to go to try and explain that away?
Possibly.
Do we have John Manuelian with us, guys? Okay, I'll say this. When I heard that, I'm thinking, wow, what a great point for the prosecutors to say, listen to Michael Jackson. This is a man who needs help. What are you doing ordering Propofol when you should be saying, we need to stop this? This guy is a hurting, vulnerable man who needs help. John, your take on this, you heard Ann saying maybe there's room for some argument from the defense. What do you see through that the audio recording we heard of Michael Jackson himself?
I seldomly side with the prosecutors, but I could tell you David Walgren gave a masterful opening statement, and he hit the nail right on the head with several points. And the one thing the defense, I don't think, will be able to explain to the jury is, why did he leave his side? Because they're going to have an expert that's going to say, you can't leave this patient's side, not even for a second. So forget how many Propofols he ordered. The bigger issue is the abandonment, because they're going to get nailed on it. Even if they're able to explain that the Propofol may or may not have been a substantial cause of effect of Michael Jackson, he still abandoned him. That's going to be a problem, and it needs to be explained.
No, I agree. I think we've just hit the 2 points that struck me the most as a prospective juror. You guys are the lawyers. I'm sitting here as a prospective juror. The two things, Michael Jackson's own voice and just the words from David Walgren. He abandoned him, especially when he laid out all the drugs, lorazepam, midazolam, this litany of drugs until you top it up with Propofol. And real quick, and then let's talk about this recording. John, I'll start with you on that. I mean, isn't that a point where Conrad Murray just said, stop the presses, listen to this man, we've got to do something. He is in bad shape. Your thoughts, John?
Absolutely. It paints a picture. Actually, it makes Murray look really bad. It makes him look like he's using him as a guinea pig to try the Propofol to see what, if any, effects it has on him. So it's evidence that he's sort of testing Michael Jackson and the effects of Propofol, and it goes to his knowledge, like David Walgren says. He knew what would happen to this guy when he gave him the Propofol, and it makes him look like he's a drug dealer, that he's ordering Propofol at $150,000 a month, which he apparently negotiated for $5 million. And like the prosecutor said, it's about human decency, not only about the standard of care. So they've got huge hurdles to go. And I'll tell you, the defense has got to go in striking every single thing that they said about the standard of care, including the written informed consent, why he didn't call 911, and ultimately they got to shrink that timeline to make it look like Michael Jackson didn't die, wasn't as dead as David Walgren wants the jury to believe.
We have our experts with us, and as soon as opening statements of the defense happen, we'll take you back to Los Angeles. I want to go again to Attorney John Manuelian, criminal defense attorney. John, all-encompassing case there. How important was it to humanize Michael Jackson, to show him as, and they even called him Michael, show his kids about how Michael was motivated by wanting the This Is It tour in part so his kids could see him perform?
It humanized him and made Michael look like a regular guy, somebody that we will all sympathize and connect with. And I thought what David Walgren did with the PowerPoint was genius. Every time you saw Michael Jackson and he talked about how strong he was, he showed that picture to the left of his hands in the air, and he looked great. And then the next picture, you see him on the hospital bed or on a bed dead, and that would be right after Conrad Murray gave him the Propofol. So he's doing a brilliant job of showing Michael being in tip-top shape, and then what would happen to you if you were under the supervision of Conrad Murray. So I think it's really effective in this case.
And how powerful is that again? And John, and you and I just talked about it, Michael Jackson humanized by the prosecution. How do you make that turn now if you're the defense? Because prosecution, Michael Jackson says, they say he's vulnerable, he needed help. Now you've got to turn it here if you're the defense, right? And you've got to put Michael somewhat on trial as a man who demanded these drugs, right?
Well, not really. I mean, you could explain that Dr. Murray was a good doctor and that he was actually trying to wane him off the drugs, almost as though a doctor that was treating a heroin addict would give methadone. But the problem is he ordered a ton of Propofol, so when was he going to start waning him off the drugs?
Right.
And the other problem is he's got to slim down that timeline. So if you show that the doctor was there to help Michael Jackson, and yes, is making a lot of money, but he was there to wane him off the drugs, and then you narrow down that timeline, you might be able to convince the jury that it wasn't gross negligence.
Well, that's a great common sense point if you're a juror sitting there going, wait a minute. The defense is going to argue he's trying to wean him off, yet you're ordering, what was the number? 155,000 milligrams of Propofol at the same time. That just doesn't compute on a common sense level. Buzzwords from the defense, from Ed Chernoff, like making decisions and responsibility. In other words, Michael Jackson was a grown man, a 50-year-old man. He wasn't completely helpless in this situation.
Yeah, and if you notice, that's exactly what Walgren did. He mentioned the $150,000 amount 5 times, extreme deviation of care, gross negligence. He hammered those keywords over and over again. That's exactly what the defense should do in this case. Start out by humanizing Conrad Murray, say that is not a bad doctor, he was there for good. Yes, he was getting paid a lot of money, but that's not enough to show that he was grossly negligent. And then show that he didn't deviate to breach the standard of care, and you do that by either putting him on the stand or putting other doctors on the stand that will corroborate that he did everything that they would have done in that similar situation.
John, let me stay with you for a moment. And as David Walgren did a great job, again, laying out that timeline of all the different everything. Lorazepam, it's an anti-anxiety drug, a sedative, midazolam, and it was given, and this is Conrad Murray's timeline, and I don't even think the state buys it in full. You know, they think it's worse, by the way, but it's lorazepam at 2 in the morning, midazolam at 3, lorazepam at 5, midazolam at 7:30. Bottom line, it's one drug after another topped off with propofol. That's huge, isn't it? I mean, I'm no doctor, but that sounds very negligent to me, and then you're going to leave the room after all that?
Yes, but there may be only one way around that. And the defense has to show that just like any other drug addict, that Michael Jackson built a very high tolerance level. In fact, that timeline is consistent with that theory. He gave him the benzodiazepine, he gave him the lorazepam. None of these drugs helped. Ultimately, Michael was asking and begging for the propofol. So you could use a timeline to your benefit by showing, look, you gave him all these drugs, and a regular person would have been knocked out, but because of his high tolerance level, it needed to go to the other level, which was propofol. And Conrad Murray kept asking over and over again, do you really want it, Michael? You got to be in the studio. So it shows his concern. So that's one of the ways that you could do,
Gotcha.
you know, his testimony in a favorable light.
Yeah, and I see you nodding. Obviously, I'm going to say, wait, he's a patient. You say no if you're a doctor. You should know better, but you're nodding with John there as a potential opening for the defense.
Right, and again, you know, Conrad Murray had worked with him for a number of months, and he helped build up that tolerance by presumably giving him the same dosage of drugs or gradually increasing it over that amount of time. So he was familiar with, you know, how Michael Jackson reacted to the drugs, what his tolerance was, how much he thought was a safe level. But, you know, he did trust Conrad Murray, but he also he had a contract with Conrad Murray that Murray had to do whatever was reasonably requested of him to do. So, you know, I think that was a little bit of a stretch there.
Okay. John, your thoughts there? Because, again, that was the first thing, what we just heard was one of the first things that David Walgren said, was that a trusting Michael Jackson misplaced that trust and it cost him his life.
Yeah, that could be a double-edged sword. The jury could look at it as Michael was going doctor shopping and Conrad Murray was the only doctor out there that would do what he wanted, which is specifically to get him the propofol. So, you know, it's a double-edged sword. And I think ultimately, at the end of the day, what you have to look at is whether or not Conrad Murray did breach the standard of care by getting the propofol. The only way you could undo that is to get other doctors that say they would administer propofol. So you can't do that. And then the other problem is, ultimately, how is he going to explain why he left the room? How is he going to explain that timeline? So that all needs to be addressed right away at the opening statement.
Yeah.